All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here on our virtual town meeting to talk about broadband in Hudson. I'm Curtis Dean, and I am one of the consultants that the city's hired through C-Band Solutions to help with the project. My cohort is Todd Kilkoff, who's also on the call. Just to give you guys a little bit of background about the two of us, Todd and I have both, I'll let Todd speak for himself, but we both work with a lot of communities and municipalities in the state of Iowa that are exploring or building broadband networks, fiber networks. My background, I started way back in the late 90s at Spencer Municipal Utilities, and we built a broadband network. And now I've been for about the past 7 years operating under my consulting business, Smart Source Consulting. I've been doing studies for communities just like Hudson around the state. And Todd is works with me on a lot of these studies. So Todd, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Todd Kilkoff. I have a more of an operational and also financial background, in particular with fiber utilities. As with Curtis, about 7 years ago, I started doing things under Kilkoff Advisory Services. I do other business planning and launch type operations, also public-private partnerships.
All right, thanks, Todd. We appreciate you all being on. We're going to mute everybody except for those of us that are talking. So if you, I think I can mute her. There we go. I'm just going through and looking for people that aren't muted so that we can, we will unmute you later if you have a question or anything. Right now, I want to just let you know that if you do have any questions, probably the best way to express that question and get it answered, there should you'll see a chat function at the bottom of your screen. You can click that and you can ask your question.
Oh, we haven't emptied
put
it
in
ever.
the chat window.
Oh, no.
And if you are able to, you can type that in there and we will call on you and get your question answered. I'm still letting people in here from the waiting room as we get going. I will also, on occasion, just let people unmute themselves and ask a question. So we will get underway with everything. So I mentioned I introduced you to Todd. Our other cohort that is helping with this project is John Willow. And she might be monitoring the call tonight, but she has been ill with COVID, and like it seems like everybody in the country has either had it or is just now recovering from it. So she is kind of been down and out. So let me see here. It looks like a couple more people are joining, so I will admit them. Excellent. All right, so we'll get underway with our presentation here. We want to talk to you a little bit about the study that we are conducting on behalf of the city of Hudson and the broadband utility of the city of Hudson. So first of all, we want you to be thinking about your broadband experiences as we go through this presentation. A little bit later on, we'll ask for you to make any comments that you have about your current broadband services or concerns you might have or expectations that you might have. You are also welcome to put those in the chat window and we'll share those with everybody. And like I said, a little bit later on, we'll ask you to pipe up a little bit if you'd like to and share your experiences. Right now, if anybody would like to unmute themselves and share any of your broadband experiences, we'd welcome that as well. All right. Well, you're ready now. Next, when I call for that again, you'll be ready to pipe in, because this process, this study we're going through is all about gathering feedback from the residents of Hudson about broadband services as the city looks at what potential options it might have for improving those services. All right, so keeping up with more people joining here. There we go. We got over 20 people online. That's great. Appreciate that. So the goals of the broadband study that we are working on, first of all, education, and that's really our way of wanting to make sure the community understands just how important quality broadband is. It's become more and more important as time goes on. It's come to the point where excellent access to broadband and internet is no longer a luxury. It is an absolute essential for everyday living. And so we want people to be able to understand that and realize just how important it is in all aspects of our life. Also during the study period, where engagement is where we are reaching out to people like you through one-on-one discussions, stakeholder group meetings, and meetings just like this to find out what you're thinking about, what you're learning about, what you need to learn about, and you're sharing those experiences like I mentioned before. We're taking a survey, and that survey is launching today. And in fact, I'll be talking a little bit more about this later. The survey is now available online. We're taking a survey to measure consumer attitudes about your current broadband options and to learn more about your thoughts. Also to measure performance of your actual internet connection at home. We know that a lot of people are frustrated in the modern world that internet providers sometimes will advertise a level of service that you maybe aren't experiencing. So through this survey, we are also asking people to do a speed test, and we capture those results so that we can examine, exactly what the trends are for folks living in Hudson. There's actually two surveys. There's a residential survey, which we're asking any resident of Hudson to take from their home broadband connection. And when we say home broadband connection, preferably, if at all possible, take that from your wired internet connection, your DSL, your cable modem service, not your cellular data package. Now, if you are only using cellular data for data at home, that's fine. You could take the speed test on that, but we really are trying to examine what the capabilities are and the limitations are of the wired internet services in the community. For if you are operating a business in the community, whether that be a bricks and mortar business or a business in your home, we want you to take the business survey. So some people will take both surveys. If you work from home, you're a remote worker, or you operate your own business, you will want you to take that survey in your home so that we can measure that. And since that's also your, take one and operate it as your business. Pardon me. I am going to move on here, but I'm hoping my phone will stop ringing. How many of you are frustrated by spam calls? I know I am. All right. For some reason, my camera turned off, so we'll have to address that as well. Not that you need to see me. You're paying attention to the slide, no doubt, but also change my microphone back. Okay. So the survey, again, launching today. I'll show you where you can access that, and we'd love to get as many people down, answer that survey, both residential and for those of you who are a business person, business operator, or remote worker from home, we'll want you to answer that business question, business survey as well. All right. So the other thing we're doing is a cost estimate and business model. That's kind of what Todd's focusing on. And that's where we're just trying to determine what would be the parameters financially of if a publicly owned network were to be built in Hudson, and would it be in the best interests of the community to do that using various models. So I don't, Todd, if you want to share a little bit about what goes into that. We won't get into great detail, but that's a key part of this study as well.
Yeah, we're taking basic information about costs to typically hook up a premise using some of the latest projects that we're working on right now, and then trying to show what it really takes about the retail rate in order to borrow money, just to say this is what would have to happen for anybody to own this network and operate it, and make sure that there's enough customer demand, which comes from the survey, that would show either a new entrant or even the city about how many future customers we could anticipate, and then run that through a financial model to say whether or not it's something that somebody, whether it be again a private provider or somebody owning a network and leasing it, would be able to break even. And about what time frame, given the credit markets.
Yep. And this is a similar process that we've worked with in other communities. The answer is different in every case, right? Every community has different attributes. And so it's important that we take a look at what those attributes are for Hudson and try to come up with some guidance to the city about what options they might have and which ones are off the table. And part of that too is partnership identification. If the city were to partner with a private company and operate a broadband network, fiber to the home, most likely in Hudson, who will those partners be, and what can they bring to the table, and to what benefit for the community? So those are the overall goals of the study that we are going over tonight. We're talking about the different methods that we're using to conduct the study. We are doing the community broadband survey, which again, I will show you how to take that here in just a moment. We're doing the broadband performance assessments, the speed test that's being taken as part of the survey, but that's a key measurement here. And then we're having conversations one-on-one and in groups and meetings just like this. In addition to tonight's public meeting, we're going to be doing several stakeholder group meetings where we meet with different people from the community that are involved in things such as education, healthcare, public sector, and talking with them about what their broadband needs are, what their perceptions are about broadband service in Hudson, how it could get better, and their thoughts about how that could be achieved. So that's all part of the study that we're conducting.
Broadband internet meeting.
So what is better broadband? Let's talk a little bit about that, because we are in an age where broadband services have become essential, and we kick the word around a lot. But what does it mean? What is better broadband? If what you have now is broadband, what does better mean? Well, we think that better means a number of things. First of all, we think it's got to be fast. And by fast, we mean what others mean is that, and what the state of Iowa has identified as being should be 100 by 20. What does that mean? Well, those two numbers represent download and upload speeds. So download speeds of 100 megabits per second or better are what are considered the standard today. In fact, really the minimum for quality broadband connection. 20 megabits per second upload speeds, again, considered kind of the minimum by today's standards. And the upload speeds continue to increase in need. And in fact, most broadband networks that are being built today, fiber networks, that second number there, that 20, is usually the same as the first number because it's symmetrical. And that's not only because the technology allows it, but because more and more people are using the upload, the upstream traffic, so to speak, for things like this. So right now I'm using my upload to present this. And fortunately, I have a fiber connection. So knock on wood, it doesn't go down. When I just said that, I'm able to stream my content, the slides, camera, and everything out to Zoom. And then you guys can use your download connection to use it, to see it. But you're also using upload right now as you're on this in this meeting, because there's data being pushed out from your computer or iPad or whatever device you're using out to Zoom and then back down to everybody else that's watching. So both download and upload speeds are important, and 100 by 20 is considered the standard. Some providers can meet that today, some cannot. And so that's part of the evaluation here, is to see if the providers that you have are providing real world situations with those kinds of speeds. We think better broadband should be reliable. One of the biggest pain points that we see when we've talked to people in communities all over the state of Iowa is that their outages are too frequent, they last too long, and they take too long to fix. And that the outages, when they happen, seem to happen at the least convenient times. In addition to just outages, there's slowdowns, and those happen when a lot of people are trying to use the internet at once. If the provider's network is of a certain type, it tends to get overloaded, and then you have a poor experience. We can probably all share stories during the COVID pandemic when kids were at home trying to do schoolwork online, when they were locked out of schools. Mom and dad are maybe home trying to work, and it led to a series of compromises about who could use what and when. And so we believe that a reliable connection that's steady and big and with enough speed and bandwidth for everybody is better than what in some providers are able to provide today. We think better broadband should be affordable. Now, affordability is a tough measure because you can't put a number on it. What's affordable for one household may not be affordable for another household. Fortunately, there is a federal program called the Affordable Connectivity Program. Most, if not all, providers are participating in that, and folks that meet certain income levels can get a $30 a month credit on their internet service. So that's a great tool that's in place right now. But even with that tool in place, sometimes internet services can be out of reach for some folks. So getting it better also means making it affordable, although it can't be free because networks are expensive to build, systems are expensive to operate, trucks are expensive to run, employees are expensive to hire. So you still have to have enough money to pay all those bills, no matter whether your provider is a private company or a public company. They have to be able to pay those bills. And so the affordability certainly factors into that. We think it should be universally available. And what we mean by that is that there shouldn't be any haves or have-nots depending on what side of the street you live on, what street you live on. In almost every community in America, there are gaps, and there are places where, say, services are available in one area, but not the poorer services are available in other areas. And we think that, you know, where you live in a community or anywhere in America shouldn't determine whether or not you can function online. So that's why this universal availability is part of what we think is a measure of better broadband. And finally, it should be responsive and consumer friendly. One of the biggest complaints that people have about internet service is that the providers are huge. They are hard to reach. They are hard to get responses from. They may not always be as consumer friendly as you'd like, and that's something that people really want. And so if you're gonna cross everything off the list and you can get that one, you're gonna have a lot happier customers, and you're gonna have a lot. You're gonna have a better feeling about the service you have. So we think that's an important part of having better reliability. What you're seeing right there is a map of the state of Iowa. That's fairly obvious. But the blue blobs that you see on there, wherever you see colored blue, that represents a location that, according to the state of Iowa, does not currently have what we would call better broadband. That means they don't have access to 100 megabits per second download speeds and 20 megabits per second upload speeds. And that's a problem, because the efforts that are being made right now to connect more Americans, a lot of funding is coming down the pike, both from the state of Iowa and the federal government that will pass through the state of Iowa. And where you see blue on this map, that's where a lot of that funding is going to be targeted. So the folks in blue here are not getting the kind of broadband that we think that Americans deserve today. Now, I zoom in a little bit closer here to home. Here's Hudson. You'll notice that on this map, and this is just a zoomed in version of that same state map I just showed you, that where you see black here inside the city limits of Hudson, those are areas that are considered served according to the standards. And that means that you can purchase an internet service that is advertised, at least, to provide you 100 megabits per second download and 20 megabits per second upload. Where you see blue here, these blue dots, especially out on the periphery of town and maybe in some of the areas that were recently, past few years have been annexed into the city, those are areas where broadband 100 by 20 is not available. So the challenge with the mapping is, just because you have a black dot on your house does not mean you're getting reliable service. It doesn't mean that you can afford a level of service to give you 20 megabits per second upload. But the maps are designed to show where that funding should go. So one of the first takeaways from this, and we talk about this with a lot of communities, you can't really expect the state of Iowa or the federal government to throw a lot of money your way to solve any problems you have in Hudson. And that would be the same in every other community that we've looked at. You are considered to be served for the most part because at least one of the providers in town today are providing advertised speeds that meet the lower bar of coverage. So any solution that comes out of Hudson is going to be is going to require either private investment or public investment, but it's not going to be, that public investment is not going to be coming from state or federal sources. It would be coming from, say, the city borrowing money to build a network if that were the decision that were to be made. So why does broadband matter? I think most of you understand, most everybody in this world understands that the average family needs broadband to teach its kids, to teach its adults for that matter. You need it for work, whether you're working from home remotely or you're working from a business. You have to have broadband to get that work done. We have a lot of people that are acquiring second jobs or second income streams using the internet. And if you can't use that, if you don't have a reliable enough or fast enough connection to be able to do that, you're at a disadvantage. It matters for healthcare. We first really started to see what telehealth could be during COVID with remote health visits and things like that. That's the tip of the iceberg, and it's going to become more and more common, especially for specialized healthcare, where you can't have some of the very niche specialties available in every community in America. But if you've got a great broadband connection, you could visit a world-class neurologist 1,000 miles away through the miracle of broadband. But if your community doesn't have good broadband, then that's going to be off the table. So that's an important one as well. It matters for quality of life overall. Think about why you love Hudson, Iowa. Think about why you love living there. Well, you could list a whole lot of things that you love about Hudson, Iowa: great schools, quiet town, low crime, super parks, whatever. You're going to have your own reasons, but those all follow into the quality of life category, right? It's hard to have a good quality of life when you can't do the things you need to do. And increasingly, broadband access, good broadband, reliable broadband, fast broadband is an important quality of life aspect. And more people are deciding to live where they can get excellent broadband. I'm guilty of that. When I was looking to move about 1.5 years ago, I shopped around and found a place that I could get a fiber optic connection because I knew that was going to be the fastest and most reliable. And so a lot of people are doing that in this day and age. So if your community is missing that element of quality of life, just like if you have bad schools or high crime, you're going to be missing out on opportunities for growth. And really, all these go into future. The future of your community is dependent on continuing to make it stronger, to make it healthier, to make it a more attractive place for people to live, work, play. And so all of these factors, broadband is an important element of those in our modern world. All right, the fun stuff. We're going to talk about the broadband survey. It is live now, and what you will do to take the survey is you will go to the web address you see at the bottom of your page. It's ourbroadbandfuture.com/Hudson. And you can go there by just going to our broadband future, and you'll click a link up at the top of the page, as you see up here, that's Hudson. It'll take you to the Hudson page on this website. This website is kind of a catch-all for several studies that we've done over the years. And so the information on here is not just about Hudson, but success stories from other communities, why broadband is important. There's some video links on there, a glossary of terms in case your eyes glaze over with the 3-letter acronyms that people tend to use when they're talking about topics like this. But the survey is right up front and center when you go to this page. And again, there's the residential survey and a business survey. So again, we want you to take that residential survey from your home connection using your home network, not your cellular data. We talked about that. If you're a business owner operator, take the business survey from your business interconnect connection. And if your business is your home, then you're going to be taking the residential survey. But in the survey, there are questions that ask about whether you work from home full-time or part-time. So some of you will take the survey once, some of you will take it twice, one for the residential, one for the business. Now, the survey itself is pretty straightforward, but the one thing in there that you'll want to take note of is we do ask you to take a speed test. You'll click a link, it'll open another browser window on your computer. You'll run the speed test there, and then you'll need to physically type those numbers in to the correct fields on the survey. But that's very important. The other thing you'll note about the survey is we do ask for your address. This is not at all for any kind of so we can target you with advertising or marketing. No one will see those addresses related specifically to your responses other than the speed tests. We want to be able to map where those speed tests are. We might find there are areas of Hudson where the performance of the internet connection is not as good as you think it might be. And that's important information to know, especially as if the city moves forward with any solutions. One of those solutions could be to reach out to the existing providers and say, hey, what's wrong in this neighborhood? The internet speed tests that our residents took were really low there. Todd and I were involved in a study like this in Fort Dodge, Iowa, 2 years ago. And it was fascinating. There was an area of that town, a significant area of town, where the speed tests were all running about 20% lower than the rest of the town. And it was because one of the networks that was there, one of the providers that was there, that was their oldest facilities in town. It was a more developed neighborhood that had been in place a long time. So the facilities were older, and older networks, especially in the case of copper, like they had, the internet speeds tend to not be as high. So that's why we're asking for the location when you go to take the survey. We also ask you questions in there about your attitudes, about your current internet provider, give you a chance to talk about, if you think they're doing a good job or not, and a comment section. So that's where you can spill your guts if you'd like. Tell us what you think, be honest about it. We will not tell the internet company in Hudson that John Smith at this address said that you guys are really awful. But it will allow us in the aggregate to understand where everybody's heads are at when in Hudson. I have a question that came up here on the chat that I appreciate. Is it okay to do the survey from a smartphone or tablet as long as we are not using cellular data? Or is it better to use a computer? That's a great question. It's okay to do the survey from your smartphone or tablet if it's connected to Wi-Fi and your home Wi-Fi. That works great. If you take it with your cell phone, but you don't have the Wi-Fi on, it defaults to Verizon or US Cellular, then all we're really measuring is the cellular network's speeds. And we're really worried more about landline speeds here. That's what we're really trying to capture. So yeah, you can do that. Absolutely. Take it from a smartphone, a tablet. Most people, when they're at home, right, they've got their smartphone or tablet, it's hooked to your home Wi-Fi. That's fine. One thing a caveat to this, and we'll talk about this when we present our final report to the city, is that a lot of times people's slow internet experience is more related to what's going on inside the home than what's going on the provider's physical network. Wi-Fi is tricky, and there's just a lot of things that can affect signal in a home. So you could do a speed test right next to your router or gateway and just get a screaming result. But when you go take that speed test on the other side of the house or outside, it's not going to be as good. So if you are going to take it from a wireless device, my best advice, just get as close to your gateway or router as you can when you run that speed test, whether it's a laptop or any other device using that Wi-Fi. That way you're going to get the strongest signal and the best, most representative result of your actual connection. All right. So I'm going to open it up for questions right now. If anybody has a question you'd like to talk, just unmute yourself. And if you don't know how to do that or you're shy, you can type it in the chat, just like a couple of the comments that we've had. Trying to see if I can. Okay. You might also be able to raise your hand. I'm seeing if that function is.
Hello, Curtis.
Yes.
Hi. My name is Sean Shields, and I'm actually the owner of STS Broadband there in Hudson.
Hey, Sean.
and been listening to your meeting this evening, and it's been very interesting. We've tried to become one of your guys' provide or try to join your guys' membership, and we haven't had any response back from you guys yet. We were trying to get in communication to you before this evening.
Yeah, Sean, I did get your application for C-band membership and just have not had a chance to circle back with you, but I will be getting in touch with you the next couple of days.
I get it. Yeah. So we've been there now for, we've been in works of this for 3 years now. And we've actually started moving fiber around in Hudson. And of course, we would be very interested in, talking to you guys about the old partnering with a provider. We already have a lot of dishes up in the air. And that we're a fixed wireless provider.
Right.
And but we're moving into fiber to the home.
Excellent. Well, we became aware of you after we started working with the study, and the local team that we've been working with let us know about you. So you're certainly on our list of folks to talk to, especially as the city looks at potential solutions. So that's great. Glad you raised your hand and appreciate it. We'll be in touch.
Yeah. I was curious about the this 100/20 that you were throwing out there. I know that the FCC was trying to push this to make this become the regular. I didn't see anything that it was passing, but are you guys just leaning on the fact that the FCC is going to be doing that in the future?
Yeah, great question. Actually, we're leaning on the fact that the state of Iowa has already said that for purposes of future funding, and even the last round of funding that the state used, the proposals that they would consider for funding have to offer at least 100/20. The BEAD program, which is part of the infrastructure bill that came out a year ago, and whose money will probably be trickling down in the next year or so, that BEAD money will also require funds only to go to providers that can offer a 100 megabits per second by 20 megabits per second. The FCC has not changed its definition yet. It's still 25/3. So you're absolutely correct there. But it's expected they're going to follow through with that. And at this point, the FCC's definition is kind of moot when it comes to these funding streams that are on the way.
Understood. The bureaucracy behind getting to these, the consumers being able to use federal money for their $30 and whatnot. It's pretty intense. Like, you have to have a full-time person dealing with those types of things. And you made it sound like all of the ISPs out here were already lined up for this, where everybody can just start accepting it. But we dealt with, anyway, I don't mean to get into details, but I would love to have a conversation with you, Curtis. I've been listening to your podcast, and you guys are great.
Appreciate it. No, we'll be in touch. Absolutely. We can talk about, we certainly feel your pain on the ACP enrollment process. It is a heavy lift for small providers. What I was referring to is that if you look at the volume of providers out there that serve most, say, Iowans, and it's bigger companies, right? But most of the bigger companies are participating in that. Kind of puts you at a disadvantage, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
But we can talk about it off the side. We've got some ideas on that too, man.
Awesome. Look forward to talking with you, Curtis. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. You bet. Does anybody else want to chime in or have any questions at this point? Just unmute yourself. See how easy that was?
Curtis, this is Dave.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, I would just weigh in. One of the points you made that causes some concern for some folks is the service delay times, and I would echo. I've had a couple of recent outages. One, the earliest appointment I could get for service was 2 weeks out. And then the one I had last week, they got to me a little faster. It was about 6 days, but it is frustrating, and
Yeah.
you wind up paying another service so that you can have a backup service, because we have people relying on working from home,
Yes.
and without reliable internet, it's a real problem to be employed.
Yes, it is. I feel your pain, Dave, because I had a 5-day outage last year. And first of all, I thought it was totally unacceptable. There were 140 townhouses in my neighborhood that were all out of internet for that long. And why that wouldn't spur a quick response from a provider, I don't know. But that was a fiber provider. So even a good network can have bad maintenance and bad response times. Generally, what you see with big companies, probably you're on one of the larger companies, is response times are longer because they have really consolidated their technical and response teams to, so they don't have techs sitting around everywhere. They don't have 2 techs sitting in Hudson all the time, ready to go out and fix things. Smaller companies like STS, like many of the independent telephone cooperatives in Iowa, like the municipals that Todd and I have worked with, it would be totally unacceptable to have someone out of service that long, unless, of course, there were incredible circumstances involved. Generally, with those providers, smaller providers, that response time is measured, if not in minutes, in hours, but days are rare, unless, of course, your average derecho goes through and grain bins collapse and the provider can't get back on them. But you're absolutely right. That response time is a big deal when you are so reliant on internet, and you're really powerless to do anything about it. So thank you. I appreciate you chiming in on that.
And I would add that I think that's been an emerging issue that needs to be, the forums like this let policymakers know that this is something that maybe wasn't as big of an issue 3-4 years ago, but that the population really does depend on those response times in order just to not just have a quality of life, but be able to be productive in their jobs.
And Dave, I'm like you. Even though I have a fiber network to my home, I recently deployed an alternate provider because I just couldn't stand it when I would lose service for even an hour or two. I was getting nothing done, and there's only so many times you can go borrow internet at the coffee shop. They start to give you that look if they see you in there every other day. And my problem is my favorite coffee shop is served by the same provider. So if I'm out, they're probably out. So you're absolutely right. That's a big concern. Anything else want to chime in on reliability, price, speeds, anything like that at this point? Just unmute yourself if you want to. All right. We'll move on, and we'll have more time for people to chime in as we go here. And again, you can use the chat function if you would like to as well to type your meetings or to type your comments in. I'm watching that as well. So part of the study is to help the city leaders, city council, the Hudson Telecom board understand what the options are. And one thing just to people to understand off the top here is that Hudson legally has a telecommunications utility. Voters of Hudson approved that in 2005. So legally, the town has the authority to do something if they chose to. It's the right, but not the obligation. And so that's why it hasn't happened. There is no obligations. You had a comment that there's no one appointed to it. The board, you're absolutely right. That's one of the things on Todd and my list is to help the city get a new telecommunications board seated so that they can provide that guidance and whatever decisions are made here. So if we were in, say, Fort Dodge, Iowa, like Todd and I worked with a few years ago, before they could do any of these options, they had to have an election. Well, you've done that already. So your options are open from here. So the options that are being examined as part of the study, and not all of these options are going to be equally attractive by any means. One option is to build, own, and operate a fiber utility. You've got an example of that pretty darn close to you, just north in Cedar Falls. Cedar Falls has been doing it for a long time. And in fact, I'll show you a map here in a little bit. There's a lot of communities in Northeast Iowa that have built and owned and operated their own telecommunication utility over the years. So that's one option, but not necessarily a preferred option. And the second option could be to build and own a fiber network that's owned by the city. It's the city's asset. It's a public asset, but then partner with another provider, and that provider is the actual service provider. They run the network, they operate it, they sell the services, they take care of customer service, they send the bills out, they do all of that heavy lift, but they don't have to spend and invest millions of dollars in a network because the city's already done that. And then that private provider, that partner would then pay the city to use the network. And the amount of money paid to the city to run the network is enough to offset any loans that the city had to have, or specifically the telecommunication utility would have to afford to build the network. So that's a kind of a public-private partnership. Another option, option 3 you see here, is to just attract a new provider. In other words, hey, world, we've got a town here, we got great people, we need a new broadband provider, and go out and find a provider who's willing to do that using private dollars, using their own capital, with city potentially chipping in some dollars, or maybe just helping it so that it's an easier project, like speeding up permitting processes and rights of way access and things like that. That seems like a really difficult path, but it's happening right now in Ottumwa, Iowa, where Todd and I were fortunate enough to work a couple of years ago, and they had no intention or desire to build a fiber network, but they wanted something to happen. And through a process that we started where we are today with a survey, we went through and identified 2 different companies, both of which wanted to build fiber to the home in Ottumwa, Iowa. The city was able to pick the one they thought was the best fit for their community. And that company is going to be starting to build that network, I believe, next year. So that's a win for everybody. And they were able to help guide which provider was going to come to town. And they picked one who happens to have an amazing record of customer service and reliability and all those things. So that's another option. And option 4 is to do nothing, which means status quo, right? There could be a decision made that, you know what, city doesn't have a role in this. We're not going to go anywhere with it. So each of these different models has some advantages and disadvantages. You know, if you own and operate it, guess what? You got 100% control. You, the community, and that means it's a publicly owned network. So that means the citizens are the owners. You get to decide what happens with that network. You get to make the decisions about how it's operated, what products and services you offer. One of the advantages that you have in Hudson is you are close to other providers in the area that have long histories of partnerships with municipalities, like Cedar Falls Utilities, I'm on, and there's plenty of others out there. So there are partners that you can bring to the table that reduce how much money you have to spend to make it all work. Disadvantages is you got to borrow money, and this is the highest amount. This is the biggest ask. In other words, this is the most expensive option. One thing it's important to notice that these networks that municipalities have built under this number 1 generally are not using tax dollars. They are being built with money that is borrowed, and the payment is guaranteed based on the revenues that are generated from people getting services, in which case you're basically taking your dollars that you're spending now with one of the other providers, and instead of it going to the other provider, it's going to the public utility, and that money is guaranteeing the loan. Now, the caveat is Waterloo, the voters there did approve using some tax dollars as part of their financing package, but they're one of the very few that have ever done that. And again, if they did, the city would have to ask you for permission and have to have a 60% plus vote to do so. Another disadvantage of owning and operating it on your own, it is the highest requirements for administration and personnel. As you know, the city disposed of its electric utility a couple of years ago. So some of the assets that you might have been able to share with a telecom utility were disposed of at that time. So you would be hiring managers and technicians and billing clerks and all of that stuff if you did option number 1. And that just costs more money. And finally, as something we'll explore as we're doing this study, is Hudson may be too small, frankly, to make this work for you as a standalone municipal utility. Just because the economies of scale are such that in a town your size, it may not make sense. We'll be exploring that again as part of the study. Advantages of the own and partner option are the community still has ownership of the fiber network. You still have some say in how it's operated. And it's somewhat less expensive than number one, because you're not investing in the service architecture, the service stuff it takes to deliver telecom services. You're just investing in the core network. Disadvantage, you don't have as much control over it. You still have to borrow money, and you have to make sure that whatever your partnership deal is with the provider that's going to operate it for you, that's got to give you enough revenue to pay the bills. And so again, that's those some of the disadvantages there. Advantage of attracting a provider is really there's no really additional cost beyond whatever you're doing now for this study that the city's engaged in, and also perhaps assistance in recruiting a company that's willing to put their money where their mouth is and come in and build a network in Hudson. Disadvantage, you don't get as much say, or hardly any say in many cases, over how that new provider will do business. You can ask them to please respond to outages within 12 hours, but you may not be able to have an enforcement mechanism to make that work. So that can be a disadvantage of that model. And finally, if you do nothing, you're not going to spend any money, but you're going to remain status quo. It doesn't mean status quo will necessarily last forever. It could be that a private company of their own accord comes in and builds services in Hudson. It just means that you're going to be at the mercy of those companies and the private industry to make that decision for you. So those are kind of the advantages and disadvantages. I have a question on the chat. Thank you, Kate. It says, for a city that chooses to build their own system, what happens when a city continues to expand? If we continue to annex additional ground into city limits, would the system have to be built to expand as well? That's a great question. The answer is probably yes, in that it's a city service and you are likely going to want to offer it throughout the city limits. I think Todd's going to say something now.
Yeah, it's much more cost effective to build in a new development as it expands, because really you're just extending the lines. So that's the cheapest part of the network compared to the central core equipment that has to talk to the edges or talk to the houses. But it's also cheaper when it's being built, when the electric's going in or the water's going in, to put that fiber line in. So a lot of times developers want that because it actually helps sell the house and sell the development. But electric is a frozen territory, and maybe that's what the question is, but actually telecom is not. It goes
right
out with the city limits.
Yeah, as the city limits expand, the city's legal authority to operate telecommunication services will expand with it. And like Todd said, they call it greenfield, right? If you're building services in a brand new development, it's less expensive to install those than it is to go back and install services in the existing part of town where you've got to dodge trees and playground equipment and fences and things like that. It just takes longer and it's more labor. So yeah, but that is a great question. And one of the challenges that many communities, especially growing communities, are facing today is exactly that. They're expanding, their communities are growing, properties are being developed, and the providers are not always stepping forward to fill that role. They're not always stepping forward because if it doesn't meet their very specific criteria for their return on investment, they may say, thanks, but no thanks. We're not going to build our network to there.
Yeah, or they're trying to make the developers pay for it up front, and then the developer has to borrow money, and they're reluctant to do it. And so, yeah, it becomes a policy issue about what you want in your growth areas. What do you want to incentivize?
Great. And again, if anyone else has any other questions, you can unmute yourself or you can type it in the chat. So I want to show you a map of the state of Iowa, obviously. And this map, wherever you see a green box, this is a city that has built and operated a municipal telecommunication utility. Where you see the orange boxes might look yellow on your screen. Those are cities that are either under construction, like Fort Dodge, or are planned, like Waterloo. I mentioned Waterloo before. It looks like, according to everybody I've talked to there, they are on target to issue bids and start building a network in 2023. That's a big project, by the way, for a town that size. In Fort Dodge, they are under construction, and we expect the first customers to be hooked up in the spring of 2023, and most of the customers will be hooked up in 23 or 24. The others that you see that are green are already in operations, and there's several of these that have just happened over the past few years. One where it's a partnership that I think is really interesting and good is up in Northwest Iowa. You see the letters TCA up here and these 4 little boxes. In this case, each of these cities in O'Brien County, they built their own networks and own their own networks. But rather than each of them having their own little company, they formed a brand new company called the Community Agency, or TCA. And TCA is the service provider in all 4 towns. And TCA's net revenue profits go back to those 4 towns to help them pay for their networks. It's a great relationship, and they've been going strong for 20 some years. So that's an example of the sorts of things that you see, the creative solutions that have been reached around the state of Iowa. Zooming in here a little closer to Northeast Iowa, we have quite a cluster of the municipal telecom utilities. And right here in your region, neck of the woods, quite a few. Cedar Falls, of course, everybody knows. Waverly, just to its north, came about here about 7 years ago. South and southwest of you, you've got Grundy Center and Rhinebeck. Traer, although Traer, most of their customers are on a fixed wireless like STS is doing traditionally, but Traer has also done some fiber optic installations there. Vinton is rather new, just started here about 3 years ago. Bellevue, way over here on the river, they've been doing this for a long time, and are a great example of how you can get it done on your own if you do it right. And they've done a really nice job. So these are some examples of public broadband networks across Northeast Iowa. And I show this not necessarily because we think that's the solution that should be explored. Certainly it's just one of many to look at, as you remember from my previous slide. But I show this because to show that if the city were to invest in a network, whether operating it themselves or partnering with others, they have resources, expertise, support systems from these other communities to call upon to help them do it well. None of the municipalities in Iowa that operate broadband have done this on their own. They've all relied on their compatriots across the state, and they've all learned from them. So that's the main thing to get out of both this map and this other map. Whoops, not that map. That's not a map. And this map is that you're not in it. You're not in it by yourself. Now I have to skip all the way through. Pardon my progress here, folks. Yeah, this map and this map show that you're not in it by yourself. And I realize that you're not seeing the map anyway. So that's a good time. That was the last slide anyway. It's time to open this up to any questions that you might have. You feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions, push back at us, anything you want to bring up. We're more than happy to discuss.
Curtis, this is Lori.
Hey, Lori.
Hi. So one of the things that I want to be sure to think about being a member of the city council is how important is it for us with all of these other towns so close to us who have these networks already, how important is it for us to really pursue seriously doing something like this to stay competitive in attracting people to our community?
Okay, that's a great question, Lori. I think the key is to have access to the most advanced technology that you can, and that's really can be regardless of who owns it, right? But you want modern day networks with with exceptions such as very rural areas where it's just too expensive. Modern day networks should be fiber optics because they have the most growth potential. Cedar Falls Utilities, as an example, when they built their fiber network out, they started with 1 gigabit or 1,000 megabits per second as their connection. They've now been able to increase that to 10 gigabits per second. The next generation, which is really could be done almost any time, is 25 gigabits per second. The glass itself, those little fiber optics, they're capable of almost anything you can throw at it. And while the other forms of technology are also advancing and being more efficient at being able to push data to customers, it's fiber that we really see as the long-term. There's nothing in the world that's future-proof, but it's probably the most future-ready technology that's out there. And the advantage of doing it as a municipality is less about the bottom line is you want access to these advanced services in Hudson. Whether you do it as a city or somebody else does it as a private company, or you do it together with a private company is probably secondary to that. In other words, don't build it just because you're trying to build an empire, and you will not pave the streets of Hudson with extra money from a telecom utility. It is a proposition designed to repay itself and invest for the future, not necessarily to fund other city operations. That might be a long answer to a short question, but yeah. Other questions? All right, let me see. Why does the survey cost $31,500? I noticed in the paper the city paid close to $15K as a first payment. You are correct. That was the fee that we have to conduct the study. It's primarily Mike paying for time, my time, Todd's time, our third collaborator, John Willow's time, to do all the things that we are doing. A lot of the time is spent up front. So the hours and hours of time that are put into getting the survey created, creating the website, web page, et cetera, that's all up front. And that's why traditionally with these projects, we do half up front and then the rest is paid at other landmarks in the study. So that is the answer to that. On your map, are the blue squares all city-owned networks or a mix of private and city-owned? Yes, on the map I showed, Dave, those are all city-owned networks. Right now in Iowa, we don't have any that are a true public-private partnership. The ones that we have in Iowa are all publicly owned and publicly operated with wholesale partners helping. For example, there's 11 now, I think, cities in Iowa that operate municipal telecom utilities, fiber networks, but they all share the video part of it, the cable TV part of it, they share with Cedar Falls. So all the equipment and the engineering and all the things it takes to operate a cable TV system sits at Cedar Falls, and then everybody else gets that signal from Cedar Falls. And it's allowed all those other communities to offer cable TV system service at a much lower cost than if they had to duplicate all that technology themselves. Is partnering with Waterloo while they are in the bidding stages of a fiber a possibility since we are so close to them? Great question. So partnering with another municipality is certainly an option to look at, whether it be Waterloo or someone else. Cedar Falls there have been discussions even before this study started. The city had talked to Cedar Falls, and at this time they would be interested in being a wholesale partner, providing those video services I talked about to Hudson if they build a network. But Cedar Falls is not really wanting to run the network for them or be the provider on that network. Doesn't mean Waterloo wouldn't do that. Doesn't mean another municipality like Rhinebeck wouldn't want to partner. Doesn't mean your question, John. It doesn't mean that the city couldn't partner with STS Broadband to run it. That's one of the options that we have. If there were a partnership opportunity, that's absolutely something that could be done. There are networks out there that operate on what are called an open access, where you, the citizen, pay for a connection to the network, and then you purchase internet service from whichever provider you want. In which case you could pay the city a connection fee to get on the city fiber network, and then you choose to get STS Broadband as your internet provider. That's called open access, and there are some communities in America that have done that. It's a harder thing to get done financially, and so we haven't seen a lot of success with it here in Iowa, but there are some areas where they've done that. Todd, did you have something?
No, I just, the being on the ground floor of, as the study is rolling through is what's important for us to get the information. If there's pivots along the way or nuances, we learn that early, and it's best to have these discussions early in the process and along the way, because then we can try to add value later on the actual solution. 15 years ago, it was engineering firms that would come in, which Curtis and I don't have a dog in the fight in terms of building a network or not, but there's engineering firms that used to just do feasibility studies that were 2, 3 times, 4 times the price, because they were actually trying to cost out exactly what a network would cost without looking at these other options. And so part of what the value add that we did, we said, well, we can cut the cost by 50 to 75% and just get the whys out there, and before trying to figure out all the costs associated with the what's, and it gives more off ramps for the communities that we're trying to help with these studies.
One of the things that we don't go in with any preconceived notion of how you might do something. We also don't go in with a preconceived notion of whether you should do anything. That's
Right.
one of the things the survey is asking. You may feel like, and we may find through the survey, that people in Hudson are pretty darn happy with what they have, or they're happy with the choices that they have, in which case there's less incentive for the city to do much of anything. In most cases, the studies that we've done show that folks are interested in another provider. We did one in a community in eastern Iowa where that was not necessarily the case. People were pretty much happier there than most of the other towns we've done. So they didn't do anything. The city didn't do anything. Instead, what they did do is identify 2 local companies and work with them to get a fiber network built there. So they're getting the people that wanted a new provider are going to get a chance to have one, and the people that were happy with the other providers still have that choice, because none of these things are exclusive. If the city build a network, whether they run it themselves or not, it doesn't mean that MediaCom or CenturyLink or STS Broadband or anybody else goes away. Those companies all have the right to continue offering services. They'll be having a very tough competitor, obviously, but in general, competition creates the benefits for the consumer, which is what the city's looking out for here.
Right. Giving that ability to give that perspective to the council earlier
Right.
in the process, when there's lots of off ramps, is what the value is. I think that we're trying to bring to the table, and we can draw on data from other communities who have already gone through to try to say these are the risks based on what the results are.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else have any questions on the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask a question or make a statement or issue a complaint, you're welcome to do that. All right. Well, we will assume that most of the questions are answered, but we can't assume anything necessarily. That's why I want to let you know on the website, you will see my email address, or on that ourbroadbandfuture.com, the Hudson page, you'll see my email address. You're welcome. If you have a question you'd like to get answered on offline, you're welcome to do so. One more question came in. How long will the survey be open? Great question, Jason. We're tentatively planning the survey to be open for 6 weeks, but we offer the opportunity to potentially go longer. The key here is that we need to get enough responses from the survey that we can make some reasonable calculations about what the attitudes and opinions are of the community. Try to make it as scientifically accurate as possible. With most communities the size of Hudson, that means if we could get 400 people, 400 survey responses on the residential side and maybe 50 to 100 on the business side, we'll be really happy with that number. And so that's why we'll leave it open for 6 weeks. And if we need to extend it a little bit to get more numbers, we will. But right now, 6 weeks is what we're planning on. Thanks, Jason, for that question. All right. So like I said, if you have any questions you want to email or statements or complaints, you can do that. My email address is on the ourbroadbandfuture.com, the Hudson page. That's where the survey is. I know you're all going to get off this call and you're going to go take the survey. So I'm expecting the best of you to do all that. And by tomorrow, we'll have lots of responses. So we will be doing advertising this on social media. So please spread the word to your friends. If you see it on the city's Facebook page, you see it on the chamber Facebook page, please share that with your network on Facebook, so that we can get as many responses as quickly as we can, so that we can move forward with potential solutions. So Todd, thank you very much. And thank you to our members of our city council that were, a couple of them that are on the committee were on here tonight too, watching in. And we thank you all for your attention and have a great rest of your evening. Good night.